Welcome to the Mindful Mama podcast, where we navigate controversial topics, deep dive into life-changing stories, and engage in meaningful conversation. Join us in embracing the beauty of mindful motherhood. I'm your host, Corinne Adele. All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Mindful Mama podcast. Today, we're going to be chatting about the dark side of surrogacy and why there is a group of people that are so passionately against it. Our guest today is named Taylor, who is a former surrogate, and I'm just so excited to hear her story. So welcome, Taylor. Go ahead and introduce yourself to our audience.
Thank you so much. Yeah, my name is Taylor. I'm from Florida. I started out as a doula back after I had my first son, and I was really passionate about birth and birth support, of course. So I wanted to do something for somebody else. And that's where I got into surrogacy and also wanted to heal my own birth trauma, which is a crazy way to go about it. But then again, that was my mindset at that time. But yeah, I'm very excited to talk about it today.
Amazing. Okay, so you said you had your first son and it was a traumatic birth. Is that what it was?
Yeah, it was more just like, it wasn't really that horrible of a birth. It was just a transfer. I was planning a home birth. My midwife, she wasn't that great. She really didn't want to be there. And so she transferred me to the hospital. So it was everything that I wasn't really expecting. And so it left me with some trauma for sure. But it wasn't a terrible birth.
So after you had your son, you decided you wanted to become a surrogate. Was this something that you had always wanted to do, or was it something that kind of came to you after you had your son?
I had heard about it before, but I never really had any interest in it until after I had my son. And at that time, I didn't really want to have any more kids of my own. Kind of wanted to do more of a one and done kind of thing with my own and just like give him all of my love and affection. And so that was my mindset at that time. And I was like, yeah, I have a lot of youth and energy left. Like I could use this to give somebody something else. And I wasn't really actively pursuing it, but I came across a friend in an online group. We were in a fertility group because I was learning more about natural ways to remedy infertility and different fertility issues that would come up. And we had met on there. She didn't live in the same state as me. We hadn't met in person or anything, but we had a lot of conversations online. We got very close. I was very passionate about her story because she had been through so many fertility issues, several transfers, several miscarriages, and I just really had a heart for her. We got really close. So we just kind of dabbled in talking about surrogacy, like, oh, haha, wouldn't it be great if I could be your surrogate because I'm not vaccinated, I eat really clean, and that's what she was concerned about and looking for a surrogate. And that's how we got into that conversation. And that's how I got started with it.
Did you go through all of like the fertility like treatments when it comes to being a surrogate? Because there's like traditional surrogacy, which is like in home most of the time, or sometimes it can be like at a doctor, but it's just like insemination of the sperm, right? And then there's like you could go the IVF route basically, where the woman is taking on all of these drugs, and a lot of the times they go on birth control first and they do that whole process. So what was your process like?
Yeah, that's a great question because there are a lot of different ways to go about it. And a lot of people don't know that you can do it independently, but not traditionally.
Okay.
So that is the route that we went because we already knew each other before we went into the surrogacy. We went without an agency because an agency usually charges the parents like upwards of $300K, sometimes more. So with eliminating the agency, the parents save a lot of money. And so we were considered independent. They already had their clinic picked out that had their embryos at their clinic. And we went through Yale. It was through Yale Fertility. And they allowed us to go independently. They don't usually like that because the agencies, they handle all of the legalities and they keep it cleaner for the clinics anyway. But we went without the agency. We had to figure out all of the attorneys ourselves. We had to go through the psychological process ourselves, and the clinic just managed the medical side of it. So yes, I did do all of the medications, all of the pre-screening with what they require at the clinic. It wasn't traditional.
Okay, and the embryo was theirs, so genetically the baby was there. Okay.
Yes.
And did it work the first time? Did you get
Yes.
pregnant right away? Oh, wow. Okay.
Yep. It
And
worked
then
the first
throughout
time.
and then throughout the pregnancy, do you continue to do like the first trimester, all of the shots and like the progesterone and all of that stuff?
Yes, and that was one of the worst parts for me was continuing to do the progesterone shots. I still
Yeah.
have lumps in my thighs and like my glute muscles from the progesterone oil because it builds up in your body and it's really hard to get rid of when it builds up in that fat tissue.
Hmm.
It just kind of lingers there. And yeah, so I still have those remnants of that. And this was back in 2017 that you have to self inject those. You have to do it every day. And people don't realize how sick it can make you. It has
Oh.
really bad side effects. So yeah, I had to do 12 weeks of that after I was pregnant. So you do
Mhm.
it before pregnancy. You actually do more before you're pregnant. You have to do the birth control shots, and then you have to do estrogen and progesterone shots in your stomach and in your hips and your bottom, basically, and then do it 12 weeks in pregnancy.
When you went into this, did you have to sign like anything that stated like, hey, these are all of the risks of taking all of these drugs? Or was that something that wasn't really talked about?
It wasn't really talked about. They had a generic form at the IVF clinic, and they just kind of handed me it's a one sheet piece of paper. And they're supposed to have this like long consultation with you. Our reproductive endocrinologist, he was really busy. Like they had a really busy office, and I feel like because we were independent, he just kind of treated it as like, oh, we just know everything because he's used to
Mm-hmm.
the agency taking care of all of those big conversations. I didn't have an agency, so I never had those big conversations. But I think that's how he kind of saw it, and he skimmed right over it and just handed me the piece of paper. He's like, "You understand that there's risk, right?" And I was like, "Yeah, I still want to do it."
Yeah.
We really didn't have a talk about the different side effects or how that all would go and what I was potentially facing. And I actually didn't know the side effects until I looked into them while I was pregnant. So I was already in this, and that's on me. I should have looked that up before. But yeah, there's so much to it that people don't realize a substantial risk of cancer in your reproductive organs, cervical, uterine, breast cancer. Huge. It puts you at a high risk for placenta issues like placenta creta. That's a big deal. You lose your whole uterus.
Yeah.
So there's so many things with it.
Yeah, I think that piece of it alone is like not talked about at all. Um, and just the risks I've heard, correct me if I'm wrong, but I've heard a lot of surrogates say that going into this, they were told, "Hey, just so you know, like we want you to realize that this could be your last pregnancy ever. So make sure that you're done having kids," which you had already stated that you were like, "I'm one and done." So was that ever talked about?
Yes, that is part of the psychological evaluation that they
Okay.
do. It's really important that they get you to say, like, I'm done having kids, so whatever happens to me in this process, it's okay. And they
Wow.
have a life insurance policy so that if you die or if you're left disabled, like, you know that your kid is left with that. Like, they make sure that that's
Oh
taken care
my
of.
gosh.
Yeah, it's pretty intense. It's pretty intense. It's unbelievable to me how I could go through looking back now and just how emotionally disconnected I had to be at that
Yes.
time to like
Yeah.
be like, oh yeah, that's fine.
Right. Something that I have noticed, and I didn't even know there were statistics to this, but there is. I have watched a couple of surrogacy journeys online. I'm following their journey and watching along. One thing I noticed is that these women, after they give birth to their surro babies and hand their baby away, are desperate to have a baby of their own,
Mm-hmm.
desperate afterwards. And it just makes sense to me because they, went through this process of growing a baby and then handing that baby away, telling themselves, like, oh, this isn't traumatic for me. I'm doing it for a good purpose. And then it gets to the point where they're like desperate to have a child afterwards of their own. And I'm like, that's just so telling to me. It like shows after they give birth. They're like, oh my gosh, I need to have a baby right away. Like they're trying to conceive pretty quickly after. Or I've noticed they'll do another surrogacy journey to like get pregnant again. So, did you feel, I know we're kind of jumping ahead and we'll go back, but did you ever have that feeling after you gave birth?
Absolutely. It was potent. Like the way that I
Mm.
felt afterwards was, it almost felt like insanity to me, like an obsession to reconceive and have my own child and have that autonomy and that power like back, because it didn't just feel like a stripping of motherhood and a lack of a child. It felt like a stripping of autonomy and empowerment. And so
Mm.
I felt like I just wanted to reclaim my womanhood, reclaim my womb, and reclaim like the ability to have a baby on my own terms. So yes, it was very desperate. I tried and tried and tried, and I honestly think it was too soon because I ended up with so many losses
Oh
from
my
trying
God.
so early. Yeah, as soon as I got
Wow.
back my first cycle, I was trying to conceive. And so I ended up with so many losses before I finally got my rainbow, and that was 3 years after the twins were born. So
Oh,
yeah,
so you had
I was desperate.
twins.
Yes.
Okay, so let's get back into that. So, how many embryos were implanted?
Two.
Two. Okay, so were you guys hoping for twins?
No, they weren't like top notch embryos. They weren't bad by any
Okay.
means, but they weren't top notch. And they really only had enough money for one shot at a transfer. So
Hmm.
we were trying to optimize their chances of conceiving one, but both of them happened to take.
Okay. So let's go into the pregnancy. Let's talk about that. How did you feel? We kind of talked about the medication. How did that affect you in your first trimester? I've heard, like, I've watched people go through IVF and they talk about like that first trimester, just like rage and illness, like just not feeling good from the medication. And I'm assuming you felt that, right? Especially with being pregnant with twins, too. That's like first trimester twins is usually pretty hard.
Right. And we knew right away that it was twins. And they did tell me that there was a bigger chance of having more like side effects and being
Mhm.
sick. So it's hard to say for sure if it was the higher HCG
Right.
level that made me sick or if it was the progesterone. But I was very sick, like in and out of the hospital. I was basically bedridden
Oh,
and I was just puking 24/7, could not keep anything down, even vitamins, which became a point of contingency with the mom. But that's
oh no. Okay.
there's so much more to that. Yeah, that was like our first issue, that I couldn't keep anything down, not even my vitamins. So it became like a thing of, oh, you must not care, and it's like, no, I literally can't keep anything down. And the mom, understandably, didn't want me to have Zofran, but that was the only thing that worked. So we
Oh,
battled with
yeah.
like a whole bunch of different things, like diclegus, different vitamins, different herbs. It didn't work. They even tried Phenergen, which made me feel like a zombie. I was totally out of it all the time, so I couldn't take that. So I kind of just powered through it and went in and out of the hospital, got saline IVs, and just tried to get through it. Eventually, around like 16, 18 weeks, somewhere in there, I finally felt like functional. So that was good. And another thing to that is that I was also vegan going into this pregnancy. Me and the mom
Hmm.
were both vegan. And once I started eating nutritiously, like eating meat, incorporating dairy and eggs back into my diet, I did start to feel better. So I'm sure
Mm.
getting out of that first trimester funk had something to do with it, but I also think nutrition has a large impact in that. And I'm glad that I made that switch.
As far as your pregnancy goes, the mother, the intending mother has a lot to say. How much control does she have over your daily life as a pregnant woman with her babies?
A lot. So she has a lot of control over the body. Both parents do, really. Because in the contract that you sign, it's made to protect the parents because really they're the ones buying the product. If you look at it in that way, in business terms, they're getting the product, they're paying for the product, they're renting your womb.
Hmm.
So that's how it's seen, and the contract is set up more so to protect them. There are certain parts that are made for the surrogate and to protect them mostly financially. If you lose your womb or if you have to have a cesarean or something like that, they do give you extra funds. But it's really not set up to protect you. It's set
Right.
up to ensure these babies' lives as much as possible and get the parents exactly what they're paying for. So you really have no medical say over your body. And if you do want to have any say over your body, you need to put it in the contract before you're even pregnant. I really stress that to anybody who's adamant on surrogacy. Like, put whatever you talked about verbally with the parents
Right.
in the contract. And if they won't agree to that, you need to walk away from it, because it is a really big deal. They can sue you for everything that they paid you, and it can be
Wow.
really bad. And they can medically force you to do what they say if you're still pregnant. They can force you to get induced, force you to have a cesarean because you agreed to it, to follow doctor's orders. So all they have to do is get a doctor to say she needs this, and then boom, you're forced to do it. Or else you can be
Mhm.
arrested for contempt of court or sued for everything that they paid you.
Oh my gosh.
Yes.
Okay. Wow. So that's huge. The surrogate mother is basically just taken care of financially, you know. But other than that, you are giving yourself over. Like you're under authority of other people.
Right.
That's big. That's big.
It is. It was really heavy. Yeah.
I have heard of other surrogate women saying that they were not allowed to be intimate with their husbands while they were pregnant. Like that was part of their contract. They couldn't eat certain foods. So it can get really, really intense. It's not even just like the medical side, but like some of the intending parents will go so far and be like, no, we don't want you to do all of these things and like truly, truly control your life. So I think that's, another thing that's not really talked about in this. I mean, this whole conversation is not talked about, but there are some specific things that I'm like, wow, like I don't think women understand. Like, you're not the authority of yourself. There's somebody else
Right.
outside of you who is the authority now. And yeah, so how did you feel being pregnant with twins, like emotionally, spiritually? I'm sure that you were telling yourself, these are not your babies, so you were disconnecting yourself. But did you ever feel like a pull, like when you would feel them kick or like, the milestones of them growing in your womb? Did you ever feel that like same connection as you did with your son when you were pregnant with him?
Yeah, I did. It felt like, so I kind of told myself that it felt like more of an auntie role, but it
Mm,
is maternal ultimately. Like,
yeah.
you're connecting with them. And I thought it was so beautiful. Like, I just enjoyed all of their movements and like getting to
Mhm.
know them and palpating them. And oh, the boy's so much more calm than the girl. And you just know in the way that you know with your own babies. And so
Mhm.
it's hard not to connect and to love them and to care
Yeah.
about how they are and where they are in life after they leave you. It's hard not to.
Hmm. Yeah. I've heard that it can go either way. Like some women will really connect with the babies, or other women will just like completely disconnect during pregnancy so that, they're preparing themselves for the birth. And it makes me so sad because our babies in the womb, like they're so wise and they know and they feel. So all of the surrogate babies who are disconnected from even in the womb, like the rejection begins then. Like the rejection from who they believe is their mother begins in the womb. Let's take a moment to talk about today's first sponsor, FRTIL. Have you been looking for the highest quality supplements that actually make a difference in your energy and overall being? Me too. And I finally found that in FRTIL. FRTIL offers multiple different supplements such as beef liver, zinc, vitamin C, and shilajit in their simplest, purest, most bioavailable form. Now, I've been taking beef liver for years and never really noticed a difference until I switched over to FRTIL. Just a few weeks into taking these, and I noticed a massive shift in my energy. Come to find out, FRTIL uses a freeze drying method to preserve and optimize overall effectiveness in all of their supplements. Something my old beef liver brand did not do. Go to their website, FRTIL, that's FRTIL, and try them out yourself. And don't forget to use my code Corinne10 for 10% off. That's KURIN 10. Details in the show notes. So, is there anything else you want to speak to when it comes to your pregnancy? And then we can kind of go into the birth.
I would say for the pregnancy, I guess I didn't realize how hard that another pregnancy could be, especially when you incorporate synthetic medications and you have all this stress and this pressure on you, how hard it really would be, especially for people that have already had home births and have had care with midwives or have
Mm.
done their own care. Because all I had with my first son was care with a midwife. And ultimately,
Mhm.
I did end up in the hospital, but the care is vastly different between
Right.
obstetrics and midwifery. And so that was a huge, whoa, transition for me. So when I see these home birth, free birth moms like, oh, I'm going to pursue a surrogacy, I'm like, you have no idea what you're getting into,
Yeah.
because just the first 12 weeks of it alone are medical appointments every week, if not multiple times a week. It is so strenuous on your body, on your schedule, on your family. Like, it really just takes so much. And even if that dollar sign of money looks worth it, it's like, you don't know exactly what you're signing up for until you're into it and you're
Right.
committed and you're like, whoa. So yeah, I'd just say it's a huge commitment. And I didn't realize that until I was already in my pregnancy.
So, what was your relationship like with the intending parents throughout your pregnancy? Was it a good relationship? Did you feel like they were taking care of you, like emotionally checking in with you as well? Or was it more so just like transactional? We're here for the babies. How involved were they in the pregnancy? Did they come to your appointments? Were you chatting every day? What did that look like for you?
So it went kind of back and forth. It wasn't very consistent. So they didn't live in the same state as me. They were on the totally opposite side of the coast. And they couldn't come to most of the appointments because of their work schedules. And mom also had like several autoimmune issues, so it was really hard for her to like travel and things. So their plan was to just come down for the birth, really. But she had told me prior to pregnancy, like, hey, if you get really sick or if you just really need support, because they knew that I didn't have much family support. My family wasn't
Mm.
very like into the whole surrogacy thing. They're like, okay, you do you kind of thing. She was like, if you ever need support, like, I'm going to be there. And when push came to shove, she was not there at all. She was just
Mm.
like on the sidelines, like, okay, well, do what you got to do. Listen to whatever the doctor says. Like, but then at the same time, it would be like, oh, are you eating healthy? Are you eating organic? Are you taking all your vitamins? And it's like, no, like, I'm barely able to get out of bed. Like, I need help. I need support. And,
Mm.
financially, I don't know if I told you already, but I was low compensation. So for the whole pregnancy, after birth even, it was a total of 8,000. And so that really just paid my rent each month. And I was so sick that I couldn't work. So it really left us financially drained rather than supported. And she kind of
Mm.
looked at it as like, well, we're paying you, so like, shouldn't you be able to get support? And it's like, no, like, neither one of us can work because my husband is with my toddler. And yeah, it was just a whole mess. So big lack of support, where she also wanted to have control. So she was more checking in a means of, what are you doing? Are you taking care of your body so that my babies are well provided for, rather
Right.
than like, are you okay?
Okay. And just for everyone who's listening, a typical twin surrogacy is usually around like, isn't it 70 to $80,000? So you
Yes.
being low comp and receiving 8 grand is a huge deal. Like that is, I mean, you were doing it for her. You wanted to do
Right.
this. It wasn't like I financially want to, bless myself by also blessing somebody else. It was like, no, I'm doing this.
Right.
Um, so
It was out of love.
yes, out of love. Um, I just kind of want to go into that a little bit as far as like the financial stuff goes. Just the predatory marketing of the surrogacy business. I know you guys didn't go through an agency. That's where it comes from, is these agencies. So, I'm an influencer. I share things online. I have been contacted by agencies myself saying, "Hey, we want you to promote surrogacy and we're going to send you several $1,000s to do so. You don't have to become a surrogate yourself. You don't have to know anyone that's a surrogate, but we want you to share to your audience how surrogacy can financially benefit other women. So, because you have a platform, we're going to pay you, the influencer, thousands of dollars to do this." So, it's not just the surrogate women that are receiving tens of thousands of dollars. They're now utilizing influencers to speak on the subject. It's just extremely predatory because they want me to come on my platform and say, hey, if you're struggling financially, they give you a concept and it's like, this is what we want you to post about. And the concept is to talk about the financial gain. And like, hey, this is what you will receive financially. So the surrogacy industry preys on women that are in financial distress. So they're like, it usually says, oh, the range is like $30,000 to $70,000. You're changing somebody's life. And you can also put a down payment on your house for, to buy a house for a mortgage. You can take your family on an unbelievable vacation. So the way that they market this is just so predatory and insane. And I think a lot of people don't understand is like they really target low income women.
Yes, it's absolutely insane, and I see that. I see it all the time. I even get emails about it, and I go out of my way to email them back, and I'm like, okay, tell me about your requirements lately. Like, what are you doing about the COVID vaccines? What are you doing in terms of like surrogates' mental health? What do you do after that? And they usually have like no answer for me, or they'll give me like a cookie cutter response like, oh, of course we prioritize their mental health. Of course we care about the baby's mental well-being. There's always follow-up. No, there's not. And it's like you're just coming into these women's inboxes, and it falls into the hands of women who are financially desperate, which is ironic because if you look into the clinic's requirements, they actually require you to be financial stable. You can't be on WIC, you can't be on SNAP or EBT, but the agencies have a way to get around that, and they use it because they have the money to. And so they'll just kind of, skirt, like, hey, don't say that you're on EBT. Don't say that you're on SNAP. Don't say that you make under 30K, like, because the clinics might let you go. So they're very predatory. They know what to say. They know how to get around the legal loopholes, and they use it because they just want to make 300K off of these parents when really they don't have to do much work to get all of that money. And then they use somebody else's body and let them deal with the side effects and just have them sign away their rights so that they can have a cash flow.
Oh my gosh, that's just insane. Okay, so going into the birth, what was your guys' birth plan? Let's just go ahead and talk about all of that.
Yeah, so since we knew it was twins right away, it was under the understanding, okay, the hospital is where we're going to go because in Florida, midwives can't attend home births of twins. They're not allowed to. So we were all on the same page, like, yeah, we're going to plan a hospital birth. We're going to go as natural as possible. We're not planning for a cesarean, no induction. But you can't put that in the contract because if there is a necessitation for a cesarean or induction, you can't have that in there because then they could get sued. So we can't put any of that birth plan into the contract. So we were just kind of going with the flow. My OB wasn't that great, but it was the only one in the area that would take a twin client from a surrogacy and even consider doing like a vaginal birth. She had never had one in her career, but she was the only option. And yeah, she wasn't very supportive of it, but she also wasn't negative about it. She was like, okay, like we'll just see how it goes and go from there. And initially I started with a diagnosis of complete placenta previa. That cleared up around 24 weeks. So that became a non-issue. But right away, of course, they were talking about, oh, we can just plan your cesarean date because there's no alternative around this. And I'm like, no, all these cases that I'm seeing online when I research, 95% of them go away. So I'm going to wait. We're not going to do that. And it did. So I was really thankful for that. And yeah, she followed the typical pregnancy guidelines for twins, anatomy scan, multiple ultrasounds in the pregnancy, which weren't that terrible. They were pretty respectful with like, okay, please do it quick and like let me be on my way. But it was the standard obstetrical care.
Were you having like the weekly like non-stress tests and stuff near the end, waiting to go into labor?
Yes. So we that started around 32 weeks. I believe that we started doing the non-stress test. They were like terrible to lay through because it's a whole hour of them just like scanning you and waiting for something to be wrong, which is not even research based, but it was what it was at that time. And yeah, we did those weekly, and that was pretty much it other than that. And we were just on the same page of like waiting until babies come. Well, that story totally changed once the parents came down. So they came down around 35 weeks because the whole pregnancy, my OB was talking about like, oh, you're going to go into labor early. Get ready. You're going to go into preterm labor like any day now. If you get contractions, go in right away. The whole pregnancy of that, which was horrible. But yeah, I end up making it to 35 weeks. The parents come down. They're part of the appointments at this point for the most part. And then we're just kind of waiting. And they were paying for a place to stay. They expected me to be in labor in like the next week or so. And then it was just a whole bunch of waiting. And oh, we made it to the next appointment. Oh, there we go again. We made it to the next appointment. And for me, that was so exciting. I was so proud of my body. I was like, look at this. I'm carrying these great sized babies. They're super healthy. I'm healthy at this point. Like, I'm so proud of me. And they were just like, TikTok, like, when are they going to come? Are you doing anything? Are you walking? Like,
oh my gosh,
what are we doing to kind of move this along? Because we can't keep paying for a place. And it's like, what? I didn't ask you to come down at 35 weeks. Like, and you had the option to stay with us. Why didn't you stay with us? Like, it was just very disconnected and strange. And then we got to about 37 weeks and the OB asked me, she was like, so when can we schedule this induction for you this week? Like, we need to get these babies out because they're at a higher risk of stillbirth at this point. And I'm like, really? That's not what I found in my research. I found that after 39 weeks, they were at a higher risk of stillbirth. And even so, the rates are still very low. And so I'm like, I'm on the page of like waiting until they come on their own organically. Like, we're only 37 weeks. I'm not ready to be done. Like, I'll welcome them whenever they come, but I'm not going to artificially send them out. What if their lungs aren't ready? And she had nothing to say on that. She's like just following her statistics and her protocols. And she's like, okay, well, I'll talk to the parents about it. And I'm like, all right. And just kind of left that appointment feeling weird. And then I get a call from the mom. And yeah, she was not happy about that. She's like, you need to follow the OB's guidelines and recommendations. Like, that's required of you by your contract. And I'm like, that's not what we agreed upon. Like, me and you, that is not what we agreed upon. You agreed that induction was harmful and that you wanted to wait until they came naturally. And she's like, well, my husband has to get back to work. Like, his work is asking when he's going to come back. We can't keep paying for this place to stay. And I'm like, that's not my problem. Like, you signed up for this. Like, these are your babies. Isn't that important to you that their lungs are fully developed and that I'm well too? Like, don't you care about all of that? And yeah, she really didn't care. They just wanted to get their babies to be done. They didn't care if it ended up in a cesarean or whatever. So I just kind of pushed it. I'm like, well, we'll see how the next few days go because maybe I'll go into labor. Well, it rolls around to 38 weeks. And my OB has been calling me like daily, like, hey, when are we doing this? The parents had been checking in daily, like, hey, if you don't go into labor soon, like, we're going to have to push this along. We're going to have to contact our attorneys and like do something about this because you need to be following medical guidelines and you're not. Right. And I'm like, I am massive pregnant. I shouldn't have to be dealing with this really. Like, this is really stressful. And this is not what we talked about before the pregnancy. You were not being the same person at all. And I really am strongly against induction. And you knew that. Like, I carried my first son to 42 weeks. I didn't force him out. I wanted him to come on his own. And I still held that stance. And that was a big thing for me before I got pregnant. So, yeah, they didn't care about that at all at that point. And I went into the office for my weekly non-stress test. And that time I failed, which I still wonder. I'm like, did they just fail me to send me into the hospital or what? But I don't know. I didn't ask any questions at that time. I was like, okay, well, I'll go to the hospital and they can do more follow-ups. They'll do an ultrasound, a biophysical profile, do a longer non-stress test, and we'll go from there. They did it and they just found on their stress test, they're like, oh, you're just having contractions. That's why he's having D cells. And I'm like, okay, well, I don't feel them at all. So I guess I'll just go home and follow up with you guys. Maybe I'll be in labor tonight. And then when I went to go to the bathroom, my water broke all in the bathroom. It was very audible. Like, there was no hiding that. And timing. So they're like, yeah, there was no hiding that at all. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, it makes sense. I was having contractions. My water broke. She asked to check me and I was like, sure. I was already 7. So
Holy
yeah,
moly.
I was very well progressed. Yeah,
You were like almost in transition already. That's crazy.
right. And which is wild because I did enter transition really quickly. It was like within 20 minutes from the water breaking, it just hit me like just like that. So it was very intense and it was a whole bunch of chaos at that point. Like they're calling my OB, they're calling the intended parents, they're trying to get a hold of my husband. My mom's there because that was the only number that I had like memorized. My cell phone wasn't working right at that time. So I called her from the hospital phone, like, hey, can you come? Can you pick up my husband and my toddler? And because they were all supposed to be there. And my doula came as well. Luckily, I did have a doula. And they, at this point, even though I'm 7 centimeters, they're like, so we have to give you an epidural, right? For you to go into the OR and have a vaginal birth. And I'm like,
What?
no, like this is not talked about at all. No, you don't. And I was
What?
very like opposed to it. And they're like, we're just going to have to sedate you and cut you open if you don't agree to this. I'm like, what is even happening right now? This was nothing, like this was not talked about with me at all. And they're like, oh, it's because baby B is breech. We're going to have to do an internal version if she doesn't turn
No.
and present. Right. Ridiculous. And I just like felt this because I was in transition at this point. So I'm like trying to process this while I'm in between contractions that are back to back. And I'm like, you know what? Okay, just give me the epidural. Like, I don't want to have a cesarean. Just give me the epidural. So I go, once they place the epidural, I go into something called supine hypotension syndrome. And that's where when you're laying on your back and you're numb and you're in that like flat position, you go into a state of hypotension, low blood pressure, and you can black out. And that's what was happening to me. And I'm so thankful that my doula was there because if she hadn't been, I really think they would have just wheeled me back for a cesarean. She turned me to my side and she was like, hey, wake up. Like, you can't black out. Was like hitting my face like, hey,
Wow.
I need you here. You need to be present for yourself right now. And
Hmm.
I was so thankful for that. They ended up pulling the epidural anyway. So they didn't even use it. They had to pull it because my body wasn't responding well to that.
Oh my
So
gosh.
ended up getting the epidural removed. And
Wow.
then my body like went back to where I was feeling things and I was moving around and things. So it was so ridiculous that they forced me to do that. And then I didn't end up having one regardless. So then they take me back to the OR. They let my doula stay with me. And then they let the mom be like in the background because normally they only let like one person back in the OR, and had them vaginally. And it was pretty
Wow.
easy, smooth birth. Baby B ended up flipping head down, so there was no
Okay.
need for any internal anything. Because the OB was trying to scare me at the time that the first baby was coming out. She's like, if that second baby doesn't flip on her own, then I'm going to have to reach in and you're going to feel all of it. And I'm like, well, I might kick you. And she was
I
scaring
love
me
that.
so much. I'm like, can you just let me like have these babies? Thank you. She was awful, and she's no longer practicing OB, and it is for a reason.
Wow.
Um, yeah, so that was very intense, and then placentas came easy. Like everything was easy. I didn't
Wow.
bleed much. It was a very smooth process
Mhm.
from there. Postpartum was very like peaceful, but there were so many people there because it was 4th of July weekend. Babies were born on July 5th.
Mm.
The whole hospital suite was full because of all the inductions prior
Yeah,
to July 4th.
of course.
So the whole hospital floor was full for labor and delivery and postpartum. So they had to room the parents and I together for the first night, which was actually really nice because I got to
Oh,
be
okay.
with the babies. So that was
Oh,
actually really
that's
nice for
cool.
me to have them there and like be able to wake up to their little cries and things like
Oh.
that. That was a blissful surprise that I didn't realize
Mm.
that I would want. So yeah,
Yeah.
that part was nice.
So, were they like placed on your chest? Like, how much time did you get with them after birth? And were you allowed to breastfeed? Like, what did that look like?
No, so mom had a big thing about like not breastfeeding, not doing skin to skin because she didn't want there to be like a further bond than there already was. That was a big insecurity of hers. So no, there was no skin to skin with us at any point. I held one
Oh.
of the babies. This was way after postpartum, maybe like 12 hours. I held one of them. I got pictures like right next to them in the bassinet. Like I'm in the bed, they're in the bassinet, and got that one picture. That was it. So
What?
yeah, didn't really get to touch them, didn't latch them. I tried to pump, but my body didn't make anything because I didn't have that like response. So yeah, that felt very artificial and cold.
So in that moment, were you more so on this like excitement birth high for this family, or were you feeling the like brokenness? Like it is so like against nature to not have your baby after birth. But for them to
Right.
also, I know you had said it was kind of a blessing because they were still in the room with you, but like to not be able to hold them or like how did that feel in the moment? It took me 5 years to finally find non toxic makeup that's not only nourishing to my skin, but actually performs well. As a previous makeup artist myself, I absolutely refuse to spend my money on makeup products that do not work. Crunchi is the brand that finally converted me. They have personally banished over 10,000 ingredients that do not make the cut into their products, that unfortunately is in most of the makeup we use day in and day out. I'm personally obsessed with their cream concealers and their cream blushes, and I finally started wearing lipstick again because I actually feel good about kissing my babies while wearing it. So their lip pencils are a must. Click the link in my show notes and add the code ADVOCATE10 for 10% off your first purchase with Crunchi. That's Crunchy with an I. And make sure to use my link or the code will not work.
It's hard to remember because it all feels like a blur, but I
Mm.
remember feeling just relief that I was no longer carrying them and that that part of the journey was done. I was just so relieved that they were no longer like such a heavy responsibility for me
Mm.
to be carrying them, because I felt like if anything had gone wrong, they would have like come for my neck because I didn't get induced or agreed to
Right.
cesarean or whatever. So that felt like a big relief. It felt like a relief that I was going to get to go back to my baby and that I could be a normal mom again and not
Mm.
be super heavy pregnant or super sick, that I could just return to my family. But it also just felt like, I don't know, anticlimactic, I guess, because they
Mm.
weren't as warm to me as I thought they would be. The parents, like, very loving and, like, I don't know, more like family, like appreciative. It was not like that. It was very cold. They even tried to leave the hospital once they got approved for discharge, which was just a day after, because the babies were great. And when they got approved to go, they were going to leave without saying goodbye. Like my husband at that time, he had gone out to the car to get something for me because they stayed with me postpartum too. And he had come in from the car and they were walking out of the hospital with the babies in their car seats. And he's like, "Oh, are you guys getting discharged already? Like, did you already go in and say goodbye to Taylor? Does she know?" And they were like, "Oh, yeah, we were just gonna put stuff in the car and then we were gonna go back." Like they kind of went in a circle. And he's like, "It just didn't seem right." And I can't know for sure which way it was gonna go, but they did end up coming in without the babies. Like they kept them in the car seat out in the hallway and they came and said goodbye very quickly. And they were like, "Yeah, we'll touch base with you about the milk or whatever, like to get breast milk." And they did end up coming to get whatever I was able to collect and pump, which wasn't much. They came and got that about a week or a few days, something like that, postpartum. They stopped at my house. Only the mom got out of the car and just got the milk and was like, "Thanks, bye." And like nothing, like no visit, no warmness, no
Oh.
anything. It was just like very transactional, very cold.
So, after you gave birth, was there like any contact like after that initial like they got the milk that you were able to pump? What was your relationship like? And I guess I didn't ask you this before. Like, did you guys have a plan of like maybe you would see the babies once a year or like what was that relationship like for you afterwards?
So prior to pregnancy, it was the understanding that I would be like part of the family. They, after the birth and everything, they were planning to like have a celebration for me in Ireland because that's where they were from, and they were really big on like community and family
Mm-hmm.
and celebrating people that they were family with. So there was this whole thing of like, "Oh, you're going to be part of the family now. Like, you better get used to us, haha," kind of thing. Like, just very light and like warm and an intention to be close and have that connection for a lifetime and always be part and be considered like their auntie.
Right.
And she was even planning to name the baby girl, give her my name as her middle name.
Wow.
So there was this whole just like illusion of connection and closeness and that I'd be a part of the family forever. I didn't hear from them for a long time after that last time that I saw them. And I've never seen them again after that. That was the last in-person encounter. And every time that she would contact me after that, it was more just to be like, you should be grateful that we didn't sue you for all the stunts that you tried to pull. And there's a reason that you're not going to be part of their lives. Like, just very blameful and not nice, not warm. No pictures, nothing.
But you
Yeah,
didn't do anything wrong though. Like hearing your story, like all you asked was for a few more days to not be induced.
right,
And then you went into labor, so it was fine. You didn't need the induction. What in the world? So,
right.
okay, as an outsider looking in, it feels very much to me like you had said it was important to her that you didn't get any skin to skin. There was no further bonding. That the intending mother is very insecure, that these did not come, these babies didn't come from her body, and she's very, she knows very well that these babies know you and love you, and like they viewed you as their mother. So it's just so, it just feels like so dystopian to me, just this whole thing. And like, you gave them the greatest gift that anyone could possibly do. Like, there's a reason why it's called a sacrifice. To be a mother in general, but then to be a mother and then hand your babies to somebody else to mother them. And then for her to uh, just basically wipe her hands of you and be
Mm-hmm.
like, I'm done with you. And then come up with a random excuse of like, oh, you put us through the ringer during your pregnancy. There's a reason why you don't get to be involved in these babies' lives. That's screaming just insecurity and hurt and fear.
Right. And that's all that I can really chalk it up to. And
Mhm.
I know that I was young at the time and I probably didn't handle things the best, like in the way that I responded about the induction. Like, it's my body. Like, no, I'm very firm against that. I'm sure I was immature in my responses in many ways and I could see how I could have done better. But
Right.
that's how I see it, as like, it's a big insecurity. It was probably really hard for her to like watch somebody else carry babies to term when she never could. And she had to go through so many struggles just to even be pregnant, let alone not ever carry a pregnancy to term and have those babies. I'm sure there was a huge like womb wound and mother wound
Right.
there for her
Yeah.
that just like came out screaming, and I was
Mm.
the blame for that. Like, I'm the
Right.
one that got attacked for that.
Right. Which is just, it's so crazy because it should be the opposite. Like I totally understand the feelings that she's going through, but then to just like turn it around on you, that's really hard.
Right.
So at what point did you begin to like deconstruct surrogacy and then become passionately against it?
I think it was during the pregnancy that I started to really research like other people's experiences, because I kind of felt crazy on how I felt that she was being very controlling and distant and like not respecting my body and my wants and just viewed me as an incubator. And I felt crazy because I was in all of these surrogacy groups and all of these surrogates have such great experiences. And I'm like, well, why am I not? Like, what did I do wrong? Like, what could I have done better? What should I put in my contract? That's where I kind of started. Like, was my contract bad? Like, did I get a bad hand? So that's where I kind of started. And then I found, I think her name's Jennifer Law. She has these documentaries on surrogacy, on adoptees, and on the harms of this whole thing. So I dug into her different articles, and it just talks so much about adoptee trauma and how in the next few decades we're going to have some research on these babies that are coming from surrogacy that are just like adoptees trauma. And all of these different stories that I was reading on surrogate mothers and the things that they were put through and things that they were forced to do that they didn't want to do, that are really hidden by the surrogacy community, even in Facebook groups. They're like, you can't talk about that here. Like, that's
Wow.
your fault, kind of thing. Like, you should have
Yeah.
better protected yourself. You should have had a better contract. You should have had better communication and followed the doctor's orders. That's basically how they looked at it. And so I've been shunned from a lot of surrogacy groups because of sharing about my story. They basically frame it as, she's crazy. that's one in a million that has a bad experience like that. Like most people have a great time. And it's just a weird, I don't even know what to call it. It's just kind of like that mindset where you just don't believe others' pain because you had a good experience. So you just dismiss theirs. So yeah, it is definitely not talked about.
Wow. So every time I talk about this online, I get a lot of hate from people. But the way that I describe it to people is like, we know that separation of families causes trauma, and adoption is very traumatic. Like we all know that. We can all sit here and agree that any baby child that comes from a family where they had to be given up, right? That causes trauma to them. And a lot of the times being adopted can help mend that broken situation. But it is the exact same in surrogacy, except the whole point of surrogacy is to create this trauma, right? Like what you're saying, the same primal wound that happens to children that are being adopted because of broken circumstances also applies to these surrogate babies. That same primal wound is happening to them, but it is just a different transaction, and it is masqueraded as this light, this amazing sacrifice, this beautiful love, but it is we are causing this trauma on purpose. And people just have the hardest time understanding that, or maybe just like sitting with it and thinking like that surrogacy trauma and adoption trauma it's the same primal wound.
Right.
So
It absolutely is.
did you, how do you feel now, like knowing about all of that, like the primal wound of like those babies? Like another thing that I had learned is once those babies are taken away from the surrogate mother, those babies believe that their mother is dead. Like in their primal brain, they believe that their mom is dead, and like they're starting off their life this way. So after going through that, like how do you feel about that?
It's something that I sit with all the time, and I just wonder like how their personalities and behavior are impacted by that. And I don't know how their behavior is. I don't know how they are as kids. I don't know anything about them really. But I do wonder all the time. I'm like, how is this impacting like their future education? How is this going to impact their future relationships? Because I do look at it that way, that it is a huge wound, and like regardless of if the intended parents can handle it or the surrogate can handle it on a mental aspect, we're intentionally harming an innocent child and intentionally bringing them into the world to be emotionally damaged. And it just feels very unfair. And I definitely regret doing that and being a part of that myself.
Right.
And that's something that I like to tell people about with surrogacy. Like, it's not just about if you can handle it and if you're going to be okay. There's another baby that you are going to intentionally bring into this world to basically harm them. Like, would you bring a baby into this world for them to be physically abused? Of course not. So why are we bringing a baby into this world to be intentionally emotionally harmed from the second that they are born?
Wow. Okay, so along the lines of that, like the primal wound and creating a baby, and it's not like the surrogate mother or the intending parents like intention to create this trauma, but that's what happens. Like every single baby born in this way, starting their life off with this primal wound, like you said, a lot of people don't understand that just because the baby doesn't have like memory of this doesn't mean it's not affecting them. Like it doesn't mean it's not affecting their physical, like just their physical body, their emotions, their spirit, their like you're saying, their behaviors and just who they are. The comeback that I always get from people is, are you saying that women who are infertile don't deserve to have children? And what is your solution to that? Has anyone ever said that to you? And what is your response to that?
Absolutely. And it's interesting because I work with, now as a birth worker, I work with infertile women all the time, or women just struggling to reconceive. And while I do believe that all women deserve to feel that like motherhood, that maternal connection. It's beautiful. Like, who wouldn't want to? I do feel that there are plenty of reasons why people cannot conceive, whether it's their relationship dynamic, whether it's something physical. Like, there's a reason that it's not naturally happening. It might be physical, it might be spiritual. Like, there might be a spiritual reason that this person is not being given a baby, and whether anybody believes that or not is a totally different thing. But I still, in the same pocket of that, while that all of that can be true, that every woman deserves to have that maternal connection and be a mother if they want to be. There's also the duality of nobody deserves to hurt a child for their own benefit. And like, we wouldn't look at a situation where a baby was being sexually abused and they're too young to remember. We wouldn't justify that for an adult's pleasure. And while I
Wow.
don't like to compare that, like sexual abuse and infertile women, because that's not what it is, and that's not
Right.
their intention, like you said, but it's true. We don't deserve to hurt an innocent person and bring an innocent person into this world for our own pleasure.
Wow. Yeah, the one of the best responses that I found, which is very heavy, a woman's desire to have a child is so pure and it is so correct. Like that is what we were designed to do. Like us women, we have wombs for a reason to conceive, to bear children, to raise children. And that desire is pure, that desire is good. But that desire does not ultimately mean that we are owed another human being, right? As hard as that is to sit with, is any single one of us human beings owed another person? I would argue no. And
Right?
so, does our desire as women to have children, does that equal, like you're saying, trauma? Does that equal, like, oh, it's okay to cause another human trauma because I want to become a mother?
Right?
No.
Absolutely. It would be like justifying kidnapping. Like, oh, I want to be a mother, so I deserve to have that child because you have enough of them. So I should get to take your kid. I'll take your fourth kid. Like, we wouldn't justify that. That wouldn't be okay. That would
Mhm.
put somebody in prison if they acted that way. But we're over here justifying this means of producing a child for the sake of somebody getting to have a baby.
Right. And I'm just so interested to see all of those studies that will be coming out in the next, couple of years or whatever, because I feel like even just adoptee trauma is really, it's been around for a long time, but it's really starting to gain some traction where there's like, all these groups of people that are together and talking about like, yeah, I was adopted into an amazing family and they raised me well, but I'm so broken. I'm so hurt. I want to know where I came from. I want to know who carried me. I want to know my parents. And like, it is, I believe, the right of every single person on this earth to know where they came from and who they are, who their family is. And these surrogate babies are going to have that same feeling. To me, it just feels like they're kind of a wandering spirit, right? Because they were conceived, in your case, they were conceived through the intending mother and father. The sperm and the egg were put together, the embryo, two embryos were put into you. So they were created medically, in a lab, whatever. And then these two babies were then put into someone else. And then they grew inside of you and they knew you, they knew your voice, they knew your son's voice, they knew your partner's voice, and like everyone that you're around. Like if you had dogs, if you had animals, they knew like when you would get up, like they just knew your pattern, they knew your life, and that's what they thought they were going to get. And then they're born, and you're not allowed to hold them. You can take one picture with them, and then they're swept away to these strangers that they don't know, right? And then they believe, oh my gosh, my mom's dead, my mom died. And then they're loved and they're taken care of, and they're raised up the best that those intending parents can do or be for them. But there's still this like wandering spirit of like, oh my God, I was created in a lab, and then I was put into someone who I thought was my mother, and then I was born, and then I'm here. And it just like creates the spiritual brokenness, whether they can consciously believe that or not. Like it comes out of people. And like we see that in the adoption industry, but it's the same in surrogacy. So it's just, it's so hard to see that. And I'm just really hoping that, like, having conversations like these, people will hear that and they'll see it and they'll be able to sit with it and be like, wow, like, that's a different take. Because before I had listened to a 3-part podcast on surrogacy 3 years ago, I held the belief of like, I could never do that. Most women say that, and it's for a reason. There's a reason why we say, I could never do that. But I was like, oh yeah, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. When we sit and think, if we just sit there and think for a little bit, like we focus on these lives that we're bringing in. It's
Right?
so
Absolutely.
it's just hard. It's hard for me to sit with. It's uncomfortable. This whole conversation is uncomfortable to have
It
and,
really is.
to
Yeah.
talk
It's
about.
not normal.
Mm-mm.
It's not normal. And that's why it feels weird in our bodies. And you have to have like a lot of disconnect to not see it that way. And that's really what they're doing in our society, anyways, is trying to make more disconnect. But the way that I see it, it's not just like feeling entitled to have a child, but a biological child, like you're a
Mm,
biological child, because
yes.
honestly, there's so many abandoned children and children
Right.
without homes on this planet. Why do they have to be biologically yours for
Mm-hmm.
you to feel like you want to mother them? Like, why do we have to take it that far? And why are we putting so much money into these agencies' pockets and into fertility clinics' pockets for it to be biologically ours? Like, I get that desire, but there's so many children that would love to be loved that are even babies, like brand new babies,
Right.
if that's what somebody is desiring, that are out there just abandoned, whether their parents died or whether it's really unfortunate circumstances and they were given up. And there's still going to be that trauma, but if there's going to be trauma regardless, why not take a sweet baby that's already here that needs a
Right.
home, not artificially produce one in a lab to be biologically yours?
Right. And another thing that I've actually heard too, when I've, been looking into IVF and stuff, is like, even if that baby is biologically the intending couple's, once that baby is inside of you, your genes can actually flip on genes in them to be like you. And your blood is going into that, like you're crossing. So it's like, yes, genetically, those babies did belong to that couple, but also, like, genetically, the carrier is involved. Like, genetically, your genetics are involved. Like, your blood is involved. Your body is forever changed because of those babies as well. And I just find that so interesting, because a lot of the times people will have like kind of that conversation about the biological thing, especially when it comes to IVF, because like people will adopt embryos, right? And they'll be like, oh, they're not biologically mine, but like when I put them in my body, they turn on the genes. So it's always just like whatever the person wants to think is what's going to be the truth, right? And it's just like whoever has the money, that's who the baby belongs to.
Right.
So you could have biological intending parents who put that baby into you. It's theirs because they're buying the baby. Or they could adopt an embryo, put that embryo into you, but it's theirs because they're buying the baby. Or it could be traditional surrogacy, but it's theirs because they're buying the baby. But whose
Right.
baby is it really? Who does the baby believe they belong to? That's what it comes down to for me. And we
Right.
don't
It's
think
not
about
just about
that.
genetics. Yep.
And we don't care. We don't
Right.
care about that. We just care about,
Right.
our desires, which again are so pure. And I wish every woman could become a mother. And that's pure and that's a good desire. But to think about what that's going to cause these children is, it's hard to sit with. It's hard to be
Right.
honest with
It doesn't
ourselves.
override what they'll go through, and
Mhm.
also what the surrogate goes through, because in the same way that the babies can carry the surrogate's genes,
Yeah.
the surrogates will carry the baby's
Yeah.
genes for the rest of their life. And so that DNA, like I see a lot of surrogates afterwards that don't go on to have other journeys. They have these weird mental health issues. They have these weird, like, physical things that are coming up. And we could chalk it up to just the synthetic medications. That would make sense. It comes with a lot of side
Yeah.
effects or just the hardships of surrogacy. But I also look at it as like, that's a part of us that is wherever they are in the world.
Right.
And who's to say that our body isn't having these weird spells because we're sensing that they're crying right now, or
Mm.
we're sensing that they're going through something distressing. Like, we are still spiritually and
Yeah.
physically connected to them for the
Yeah.
rest of our lives. And so it's hard to dismiss, like, when something comes up for me and I'm randomly thinking of them, what's going on for them? What are they going
Mm.
through right now? Yeah, because of course, like right after it, you're thinking about them all the time. But then once you go a few years out and you're just in your day to day and something random comes up, it's like, huh, I wonder why. Because you're still connected to them in that way.
Wow.
And a lot of people don't see that or dismiss it. Like,
Right.
oh, that's not possible. You're not that connected to them because you haven't even seen them since the day they were born. But it's still there.
Wow. Yeah, and I think, that's another whole side of the conversation is what you're saying. Like the surrogate mother, whether she consciously will allow herself to believe this or not, is heavily affected. And I would argue, you can correct me if I'm wrong, like traumatized in certain
Mhm.
ways. Like, I don't know if you would align with feeling traumatized, but that's what I've seen from women is they feel at some point some sort of trauma being ripped away from their baby and like even your body just not being able to produce milk afterwards. I don't know what your breastfeeding journey was like with your son, but the fact that you just weren't even really able to pump and get milk is a sign that like your body even knew. Your body
Right.
was well aware like these babies are not with me and how that affects even just your hormones and your healing process. Like yes, of course you were able to get more rest because you weren't up with twins all night and stuff, but just the fact that your body wasn't even producing milk is like a trauma response to not having your babies. And
Absolutely.
yeah, I think even if you're not consciously, but like allowing yourself to think that, like, I'm sure there's so many ways that you could just come up with of how like you were affected from that. I'm sure you think about them every birthday, remember your birth story. It sounds like, when you were talking about your birth story, you were like lighting up talking about giving birth to these babies. And it just like made me so happy, but at the same time, like so broken because like you loved your birth story is, I know it was hard because of the things that you were fighting, but like the way that you gave birth to them, vaginally, the way that you wanted to, and you're like, oh, they came out so great and they were healthy and they were good. And I got to be with them. But at the same time, I didn't get to hold them. I wasn't able to latch them. And then they were, swept away the next day and they didn't want to say bye to me. And then they picked up the milk that I was able to provide. And then after that, silence.
Right. Yeah, it is like a trauma. It's like, I feel like it feeds abandonment
Mm,
wounds. So I can relate to that in a way, especially when how we were talking about, like, you want to know where you came from. You just
yeah.
inherently want to know where you came from. It's part of our ancestry, like to know our tribe, to know where the land that we came from and all of that, if we go back to that. And I grew up with an amazing stepdad. Like, I really feel so grateful. But my biological dad was not a part of my life until I was older.
Mm,
And that for me was so shaking. And my family didn't understand. They were like, you have a great, like, paternal figure. You have a wonderful stepfather. You have a
right.
wonderful mother. Like, what is the issue? And like, why are you having such a hard time with that? And I'm like, I just want to know him. Like, why is that so wrong? Like, why won't
Right.
anyone tell me about him or show me pictures? Like, and in all honesty, like, we don't have a great relationship. I understand why they didn't want me to be a part of his life. There's many valid reasons, but you still have that desire to know, and
Yeah.
it still does impact you. And so I would relate the feeling that I had to kind of that abandonment
Mm,
wound after. I was like, wow, I just really feel like totally used and
mm,
abandoned. And I would say that was like the biggest trauma that I got from that, and also not knowing how I impacted them, like not knowing how they are today and not knowing who they are and like if they're emotionally okay and how they're going to be impacted later in life. Like I just have the biggest hope that one day when they're older that they just reach out and they ask questions, and I'm very excited for that day if it ever comes, because there is just a longing to like know, because I do feel that guilt that like I helped facilitate and bring them into this world, even though we don't know until we know. But I definitely feel that guilt. Like, are you okay? Like, emotionally, where are you at? And they do have great parents. I genuinely believe the parents are wonderful and they're taking great care of them. But yeah, I just wonder where they're at emotionally and if they're talked to openly about it.
Yeah, that's so good. And that's so valid. And it's such a good thing to talk about. Like, yeah, I grew up with a great stepdad, but there's also brokenness in me because of my biological father and him not being in the picture. And, the validity, though, of like you said, there's reasons why, there's still brokenness there. And so, like, we can just say the same thing with surrogacy. Like, those intending parents of those babies, their children now, are well taken care of, but there's no replacement for, who they believed their mother was. So there is that, brokenness there. And it's just so important, I believe, for us to talk about and to share these stories. And so I'm just so thankful that you were able to come on and willingly share. I was shocked the amount of messages and comments that I got on that Facebook post that I made. So many people against it, and a lot of people saying like, "Oh, I was a surrogate and I lost my uterus," or like, I had a couple people to choose from. So it does make me happy that it seems like this conversation is beginning to roll out a little bit more. So, yeah, is there anything else that you want to speak on before we go ahead and end this conversation?
I think we really covered everything, and I really appreciate you having me on and holding the space for me to talk about this, because it is something that I'm super passionate about. So thank you.
Yeah. And if you want to share, because you have a podcast, where people can find you, if you want people to be able to check you out, because Taylor has shared her story on her own podcast that I listened to. Yeah, just let people know where they can find you.
For sure. Yeah, the easiest place where I'm most active is on Facebook. I'm Taylor Bland on Facebook, and on Instagram, I'm Taylor Bland Birthkeeper. So those are the best places to reach out to me.
Amazing. Awesome. Well, thank you so much again. I just so appreciate your vulnerability and you're willing to talk about a conversation that is just so it's just so difficult. And it's just so amazing though to see women like you speaking out and being able to like just hold that space for yourself, but for others, and to allow people in.
Yeah, thank you.
And that concludes today's episode. If you found value in this conversation or resonate with it in any way, I'd love for you to leave me a review on whatever platform you're listening in on and share about it on social media. Your support means the world. For more content like this, you can follow me at Corinne Adele on all platforms. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next week.